I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my own kitchen holding a dish towel and listened to my son tell me I was being difficult. That was the moment I knew. Not the moment I acted. I wasn't ready yet, but I knew. Let me go back. My name is Josephine. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a licensed practical nurse at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Leonard passed from a heart attack in 2009. My son Calvin was 22 at the time. My daughter Patrice was 19. I held everything together. I paid off the house. I kept the lights on. I made sure both of them had what they needed, even when I was working double shifts and coming home with my feet so swollen I could barely get my shoes off. When I retired in 2021, I had my pension, my Social Security, and a modest savings account that Leonard and I had built together over the years. Nothing extravagant, but enough. Enough to live quietly, tend my garden, maybe travel a little. Enough to finally breathe. I thought that was what I was going to do, breathe. Calvin called me in February of 2022. He and his wife Sherelle had been renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Houston for 4 years. She was pregnant with their second child. The lease was ending. Could they stay with me? Just temporarily, just until the baby came and they got back on their feet. Maybe 3 or 4 months? I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, here she goes, another woman who let things go too far and now wants sympathy. I hear you. I've asked myself the same question more times than I can count. Why did I allow it? Why didn't I say something sooner? All I can tell you is that when it's your own child, your own blood, something in you keeps making excuses. You keep thinking next month will be different. He's just stressed. She didn't mean it that way. Family takes care of family. That's what I was raised to believe. That's what I lived by for 67 years. It took me a long time to understand that some people will use that belief against you. Calvin and Sherelle arrived on a Wednesday. They had their daughter Mia with them. She was 3 years old, the sweetest little girl you've ever seen. All pigtails and gap-toothed smiles. They also brought what I can only describe as an enormous amount of stuff. Boxes stacked in my hallway. Bags piled in the guest room. Sherelle's sister came to help them move in and stayed for dinner, which I cooked. I didn't mind, not then. I was happy to have the house full again. The baby, they named him Darius, arrived in April. A healthy 8 pounds, 2 ounces. I was at the hospital. I held him in the delivery room. I cried. Whatever came after, I want to be clear. I love that baby. I love both of those children. None of what happened was their fault. What happened was this. The 3 or 4 months became 5, then 6. Calvin said they were saving for a down payment on a house. I understood. The housing market was brutal. I didn't push. Around month 7, I noticed things starting to shift. Small things at first. Sherelle rearranged my kitchen, moved my pots, reorganized my cabinets, put things where she could reach them more easily. I mentioned gently that I'd had my kitchen a certain way for 20 years. She looked at me like I'd said something unreasonable. Calvin said, "Mom, it's just a kitchen." Then, the television in the living room. They started keeping it on from morning until night. Loud, cartoons, and reality shows. When I asked if we could maybe turn it off during dinner, Sherelle said she needed the background noise because the baby couldn't sleep in silence. I started eating in my bedroom. That should have been the moment I said something firm. I know that now, but I told myself it was temporary. The baby was young. Things would settle. They didn't settle. By the fall of 2022, Calvin had started making decisions about the house without asking me. He had a friend come look at my back fence and declared it needed replacing. He got quotes. He told me it would cost about $3,400 and asked if I could cover it since we're all living here and we all benefit. I paid it. Then there was the matter of the water heater, which he said was on its last legs, another $11,100. I paid that too. Then Sherelle's car needed new tires and brake pads right before Christmas. Calvin said they were short that month. I gave them $800. I'm not telling you these numbers to make Calvin look like a monster. I'm telling you because I want you to see how it happens. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, reasonable-sounding increments, each one easier to justify than the last. And when you're someone like me, someone who spent a lifetime taking care of people, someone who was trained literally by profession to attend to others' needs, you don't even feel it happening. You just keep reaching into your pocket because that's what you've always done. By the spring of 2023, I had given or spent approximately $22,000 on things related to my son's family living in my house. That number didn't exist in my mind as a single figure. It was just the fence, the water heater, the tires, the groceries I kept buying, the electric bill that had nearly doubled, the occasional cash when Calvin said he was short on rent, on their car payment. What started to happen around that time was harder to put into numbers. Calvin had been working remotely since the pandemic. He did something in software sales. I was never entirely clear on the details. He started having work calls in the living room in the mornings, which meant I needed to be quiet in my own home until sometimes 11 or noon. Sherelle had gone back to work part-time at a dental office 3 days a week, and on those days I was expected, it was never discussed, it was simply expected, to watch Mia and Darius. I want to pause here because I know someone is going to say, "But you love those grandchildren, why are you complaining?" And yes, I love them with everything in me. But there is a difference between choosing to spend time with your grandchildren and being silently assigned as unpaid childcare with no discussion, no thank you, and no acknowledgement that you might have other things you wanted to do with your retirement. I had a standing appointment on Tuesday mornings with a water aerobics class at the community center. I'd been going for 2 years. It was one of the things I looked forward to when I retired. A little exercise, a little socializing, something that was just for me. Within 3 months of Sherelle's schedule change, I had missed it 11 times. Calvin, when I brought it up once, said, "Mom, it's just an exercise class." Just a kitchen, just an exercise class. I started to notice how many of my things were becoming just. The summer of 2023 was when it started getting worse. Calvin's older brother, Sherelle's brother-in-law, a man named Deshaun, came to visit for what Calvin described as a long weekend. Deshaun stayed for 3 weeks. He slept on my couch. He ate my food. He never once offered to buy groceries or contribute anything to the household. Calvin acted as though this was completely normal. When I finally said, quietly, that I hadn't been consulted about a house guest staying for 3 weeks, Calvin's response was, "He's family, Mom. You always said family comes first." He used my own words against me. I stood there in my kitchen holding a dish towel, and I didn't say another word. But I started paying attention differently after that. I started keeping notes, not formally, just jottings in a small spiral notebook I kept in my nightstand. Dates, amounts, things that were said. I don't entirely know why I started doing it. Some part of me, I think, was trying to hold on to my own reality, because there were moments when I genuinely wondered if I was being unreasonable. Calvin had a way of presenting things that made my concerns sound petty. Sherelle had a way of going quiet and sighing that made me feel like a burden in my own home. My granddaughter, Mia, by this point 5 years old, once asked me why I always ate in my room. I told her I just liked the quiet sometimes. She looked at me for a long moment with those serious little eyes and said, "Grandma Jo, This is your house. Out of the mouth of a 5-year-old. October of 2023. This is the part that's still hard to say out loud. My sister Bernadette came from Memphis to visit for my birthday. I turned 66. Wait, 67. I keep losing track. She was only supposed to stay for 4 days. I was excited. I hadn't had company of my own in months, and I'd set up the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the one I used as a sewing room, with a fold-out cot. The night Bernadette arrived, we had dinner. I cooked red beans and rice, which is her favorite. Mia sat next to Bernadette and chattered all through the meal. It was a good evening. After dinner, Calvin pulled me aside in the kitchen. He said, and I want to make sure I get this right because I've turned it over in my mind so many times since. He said, Mom, Sherelle's not comfortable with someone she doesn't know well sleeping in the house with the kids. I said, Calvin, that's my sister. He said, I know, but this is our home too, and Sherelle has to feel safe. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My son, in my house that I owned outright, that I had paid off with 31 years of nursing wages, told me that my sister, a 63-year-old retired schoolteacher from Memphis, made his wife uncomfortable. Bernadette was in the next room. I could hear her laughing at something Mia said. I told Calvin that Bernadette was staying. I kept my voice low and even. He gave me a long look and walked out of the kitchen. Sherelle didn't come out of the master bedroom, my old master bedroom, which they had moved into 8 months earlier, explaining that they needed the larger closet for the baby's things for the rest of the evening. Bernadette noticed. She didn't say much, but I saw her watching. On her last night, she sat with me on the back porch and said, Joe, how long has it been like this? I said, It's fine, Bernie. She said, It is not fine, and you know it. I didn't sleep much after she left. The thing about reaching a breaking point is that it rarely looks the way you imagine it will. You picture yourself finally snapping, finally saying the thing you've held back for months, some dramatic confrontation where you get to list every grievance and the other person finally understands. That's not how it happened for me. What happened was a Sunday dinner in January of 2024. Calvin had invited 2 couples over, friends of his and Sherelle's from Houston, who happened to be in town. He told me about it the morning of. Not asked. Told. He said they'd be arriving around 6 and asked if I could make something for dinner. I'd been cooking for this household for almost 2 years. I said I'd make a pot roast. The guests arrived. They were perfectly pleasant people. We all sat down together in my dining room. The dining room where Leonard and I had shared 20 years of Sunday dinners, where Calvin and Patrice had done their homework at that table as teenagers, where I had hosted every Thanksgiving since 1998. Somewhere around the second glass of wine, one of the guests, a woman named I think Trisha, asked Calvin how long they'd been in the house. He said very casually, going on 2 years now, we're actually thinking about doing some renovations next spring. Open up the kitchen a little. I looked up from my plate. He had not mentioned renovations to me, not once. I said calmly, what renovations? Calvin looked at me the way you look at someone who has interrupted an adult conversation. He said, we can talk about it later, Mom. Trisha glanced at me, then back at Calvin. I think she felt the temperature in the room drop. I said, this is my house, Calvin. If there are renovations being planned, I'd like to know about them. And my son, who I had nursed through 2 broken arms and a bout of pneumonia and a broken heart when his first girlfriend left him for his best friend, who I had driven to every baseball practice and sat in the bleachers for in Louisiana July heat, who I'd helped move 4 times in 6 years because I wanted him to be okay. My son looked across my dining room table at his wife and said, "She gets like this sometimes. She gets like this sometimes." I put down my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my son and I said, very quietly, "Calvin, I need you to explain to me what you meant by that." The table went silent. He said, "Mom, we have guests." I said, "I know. And in front of your guests, in my house, at my table, you just told your wife that I get like this. I'd like to know what this is." Sherelle said, "Joe, can we please just?" I said, "My name is Josephine, or Mom. Not Joe, we've talked about that." The guests made excuses shortly after. Trisha touched my arm on the way out and said, "Lo, good for you." I don't know if Calvin saw that. After they left, he came into the kitchen where I was washing dishes. He said I had embarrassed him. I said I was sorry he felt that way. He said I needed to understand that they had built a life here and that things couldn't just run on my schedule. I kept washing dishes. He said, louder, "Are you even listening to me?" I turned off the faucet. I turned around. I said, "I hear every word you're saying, Calvin. I have been hearing it for 2 years." Then I went to my room. The next 3 weeks, I did something I should have done 18 months earlier. I called my attorney. I called my accountant. I pulled out my notebook with all those dates and figures. I sat at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning before anyone else was awake, and I added up every dollar I had spent or given since February of 2022. Direct gifts, cash for bills, repairs to the house I owned, groceries I'd purchased, my own babysitting time valued at the going rate for childcare in Baton Rouge. I didn't include that last one in the final number, but I thought about it. The total came to $31,400. My attorney, a woman I'd trusted for 15 years, listened to everything I told her. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Josephine, this is your house. You have every right to ask them to leave. Louisiana law requires 30 days written notice for a family member with no formal lease. You give them the letter, the clock starts." I asked what happened if they didn't leave. She said we'd cross that bridge. She didn't think we'd need to. I spent 2 weeks after that getting ready. I wasn't angry anymore, or I was, but underneath the anger there was something quieter and steadier that I didn't entirely have a word for. My sister Bernadette would probably call it dignity. I think that's close. I made sure my accounts were in order. I changed the beneficiary designations on 2 accounts that had listed Calvin, something my financial advisor had been suggesting for years. Not out of punishment, out of clarity. I began quietly researching what a kitchen renovation would actually cost. Because if Calvin intended to start knocking down walls in my home, I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. I also did something that I'm not sure I've ever told anyone. I started cooking less. Not dramatically. I didn't make a scene of it. I just stopped automatically making dinner for everyone every night. I made dinner for myself. If Calvin and Cheryl wanted dinner, they could make it. At first, nobody said anything. Then Cheryl mentioned, lightly, that there was nothing to eat. I said I'd been tired that week. The following week, I did the same. I was starting, quietly and without announcement, to take up space differently in my own home. Mia noticed. She came into the kitchen one evening and watched me make myself a bowl of shrimp and grits and said, "Can I have some, Grandma Jo?" I made her a bowl too. We ate together at the kitchen counter, just the 2 of us. She told me about a book her teacher had read at school about a girl who was brave. I told her I liked that book already. I gave Calvin and Sherelle their 30-day notice on a Tuesday morning in February of 2024, exactly 2 years after they'd arrived. I slid the letter, which my attorney had drafted, under their bedroom door before they woke up. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the back porch and watched the sun come up over my garden. Calvin came out 45 minutes later. He was still in his pajamas holding the letter. He looked like he hadn't decided yet what emotion he was going to use. He said, "Mom, what is this?" I said, "It's a 30-day notice. It's all in the letter." He said, "You can't be serious." I said, "I've never been more serious in my life." He said they had nowhere to go. I said I understood that was difficult and that 30 days was a reasonable amount of time to make arrangements. He said, "What about Darius? What about Mia? Did I think about them?" I said I thought about those children every single day and I loved them completely and that nothing about this changed that. I said he was welcome to bring them to visit whenever he liked, once they were settled somewhere. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't understand who you've become." I looked at my son, this man I had loved and sacrificed for and worried over for 40 years, and I said, "Calvin, I haven't become anyone new. I've just stopped pretending that the way things were was working." Sherelle cried. She told me I was destroying their family. I said I was not responsible for the choices that had led to this moment. I was gentle, but I was clear. I had practiced being both. They left on day 26. Calvin's cousin in Beaumont had a spare room. They were going to stay there while they figured out next steps. The morning they loaded the moving truck, Mia stood in the front hallway with her backpack on and her stuffed elephant under her arm and looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "Will you call me Grandma Joe?" I crouched down and held her little face in my hands and said, "Every Sunday, I promise." She said, "Pinky promise?" I said, "Pinky promise." I walked them out to the truck. I hugged Darius, who was too young to understand any of it, and just patted my face with his small hand the way babies do. I hugged Mia for a long time. I told Calvin I loved him. He didn't say anything. He got in the truck. I stood in my driveway and watched them drive away, and then I went back inside my house. It took me a few days to feel it, the stillness. The first night alone, I walked through every room slowly. I turned lights on and then off. I moved a vase back to where it had been for 15 years. I put my good cast iron skillet back in the cabinet where I could reach it. I ate dinner at my own dining room table at a time I chose, eating what I wanted in the quiet. It didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. It felt more like something I had reclaimed that I hadn't fully realized I'd lost. Calvin called me 6 weeks later. He said he'd been thinking. He said he was sorry that things had gotten the way they had. He didn't say he was wrong exactly. My son has always struggled with those particular words, but he said he was sorry. I told him I appreciated that. I told him I loved him, and that I always would, and that I meant what I said about the children. We're not where we were. I don't know if we'll ever be entirely where we were. Some things, once you see them clearly, you can't unsee. But I don't carry it like a wound anymore. Some mornings I'm even grateful that I waited until I was ready, that I didn't act in anger, that when the moment came, I was steady. I tend my garden now on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I go to water a bix. I have Bernadette coming to visit next month, and I have already planned what I'm going to cook, and she is going to sleep in the guest room in clean sheets that I washed and folded myself, and nobody is going to say a single word about it. Last Sunday, I called Mia like I'd promised. She told me she'd started a new book. She said the girl in it was even braver than the last one. I told her I couldn't wait to hear all about it. I think about that Tuesday morning a lot. The sun was just coming up over the back garden. My coffee was hot. And somewhere inside the house, my son was reading a letter I had slid under his door 20 minutes earlier. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I just sat there and watched the light change over the yard and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like myself again. People ask me if I regret waiting so long. Honestly, I don't think I could have done it any sooner. Not because I was weak. I've never thought of myself as weak, but because I needed to be certain. Certain that what I was seeing was real. Certain that I had truly exhausted every quiet, patient, generous option I had. When I finally gave Calvin that notice, I gave it without anger and without guilt. And I think that's only possible when you've waited until you're sure. Acting from clarity is different from acting from hurt. I needed clarity. What I understand now, looking back, is that everything that happened was a kind of consequence, not punishment. I don't think life works like a court system handing down sentences. But consequences, yes. Calvin had learned, over years and years, that I would absorb whatever discomfort came his way. I had taught him that, unintentionally, with every bill I paid without being asked, and every boundary I let slide without comment. Sherelle learned it too. The situation that felt so impossible by the end of 2023 didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew, slowly, from small things I had allowed because I loved my son and I thought love meant limitless accommodation. I know better now. Love and limits are not opposites. In a healthy family, they belong together. I also think about what it cost me not to speak up sooner. Not just financially, though $31,400 is not a small number for a retired nurse on a pension, but in quieter ways. The water aerobics class I missed 11 times. The mornings I ate breakfast alone in my room to avoid tension at my own kitchen table. The night my sister Bernadette sat with me on the back porch and asked how long it had been like this. And I said, "It's fine," when it was the furthest thing from fine. There is a kind of self-betrayal that happens so gradually you almost don't notice it. You only see it clearly once it stops. What got me through was something I can only describe as finally deciding to trust my own judgment. Not anyone else's version of what a good mother looks like. Not Calvin's framing of events. Not the voice in my head that kept saying, "Maybe you're being too sensitive." My own knowledge of what was true. I had kept that notebook. I had the dates and the figures and the exact words. When you have evidence of your own experience written down in your own handwriting, it's harder for anyone, including yourself, to talk you out of what you know. Mia asked me once if I was brave. I told her I didn't know yet. I think bravery isn't something you feel in the moment. It's something you recognize later, when you look back at the version of yourself who made the hard choice anyway. That Tuesday morning on the porch, coffee in hand, I was just a 67-year-old woman doing what she should have done a year earlier. But I showed up for myself. And sometimes that's the whole thing. I hope that's something Mia remembers.